Did you know that almost 50% of millennials plan to leave their jobs within the next 2 years? And that over 60% of millennials actually do gig work on the side. And over 80% millennials would take a gig job if it paid more than what they make now. So friends, are you surprised? Well, Deloitte's 2019 Global Millennial Survey states just that. In fact, at a recent study by the gig platform Freelancer, it was found that the actual job satisfaction among gig workers is almost 8% more than the average full-time worker. And while full-time workers worry about income stability, gig workers are actually less worried about that. So are we going to be seeing a new work order with the emergence of the gig workforce? What are some global trends we can expect? How has the gig scenario been evolving in India? How has COVID-19 affected the gig market? What market segments and domains will see a spike in gig? And what will be the next normal? Would it be full-time employment or would it be gig? Friends, welcome to the HROne Future of Work webinar series. The theme today is the emerging gig workforce. And I have with me an interesting and diverse group of thought leaders. We have today with us Kamal Karanth, Atul Kunwar, Karan Jain, and my name is Thomas Abraham. I would request each of us to briefly introduce ourselves, and I would request Kamal to start the proceedings for today. Over to you, Kamal.
Thank you, Thomas, and thank you all for tuning in today. Brief introduction about me. Last 2 decades of my growth and learning is attributed to what we today call as gig economy. Since 2001, when contract staffing, as we used to call it those days, took off in India, I was fortunate to be working with a company called Mafwa, where I learned the basics. I call it schooling of staffing those days. I spent about 8.5 years in India and APAC markets over there. My last employment was with Kelly Services, where I can say that I graduated there in the world of staffing. And the last 3.5 years, along with my co-founder as an entrepreneur, I'm busy co-creating a specialist staffing company called Xpheno, where we put engineers in technology and automotive companies on gig work. So my catharsis is about writing on workplace dynamics. And I like to write about those water cooler discussions at work, and that's me.
Well, thanks, Kamal. But I must tell our viewers that Kamal is a modest person. He's a very prolific writer, and you must follow him. He has regular column with the Hindu Business Line. And also one other interesting fact about Kamal, that he has close to 3.5 lakh followers on LinkedIn. So Kamal, thank you so much. And it's an honor to have you with us on this panel. Over to you, Atul. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm on the other side. I'm a new gig worker. So recently introduced to the concept. So 2020 has been a year where I've got into this gig economy bit, and I'm experiencing it firsthand. So maybe I'd be able to share some elements of that. But from a perspective of what I bring to the table, I've been a CXO in various companies, both India and global context, and turned around several businesses, grew several businesses, listed, unlisted, and so on. And so the kind of offering that I provide from a gig worker perspective is around strategy, around business operations, analytics, in terms of new business areas to go in, M&A, et cetera, et cetera. So that's some of the things that I'm working across on. And one other element that I'd like to point out is that I did a stint where I raised 2 PE funds and invested in SME business. And a lot of them are actually gig work businesses. I couldn't understand them at all to begin with. So it's been quite a journey across in this spectrum. So that's about me.
Thanks, Atul. Well, I've known Atul for a very long time and have been following him professionally as well. And I must say that he's in that top percentile among tech professionals, and truly is one of those, as I call, a high energy rock star in the tech business. So thanks, Atul, for being on the panel today. Over to you, Karan.
Yeah. Firstly, I would like to thank Kamal, Atul, and you for collaborating today on this platform. Hi, I'm Karan Jain. I'm executive director at Unicorps Group. It's a 25-year-old organization. My father started it, so I joined it 8 years back. So it's a CM level 5 organization with 700 employees across 9 locations. So we operate in three verticals. First being business automation, we help SMEs automate end-to-end their business processes. We have 1,000+ customers in India. Then we do a lot of e-governance project with central and state government. So we have delivered 200+ government project with core focus in education domain. And 8 years back when I joined, so we started HROne with the vision of futuristic HCM suite to save 1 billion HRRs and to build happy workplaces. So today we have 400+ enterprises in India using our product across 18 industry with 3.5 lakh users.
Well,
Yeah.
thanks, Karan. But there is a little known fact about Karan. Karan used to be a former national level table tennis player, for the benefit of our viewers. Yeah. Okay, friends, my name is Thomas Abraham, and I'm the founder of a company called HR2Tech.com. And I basically work with HR tech companies and SaaS companies and help them with their business strategy, go-to-market, and global expansion. In fact, very recently, one of my portfolio companies was acquired by a global consulting firm. And when you do have the time, do check out my YouTube channel. It is called Musings with Thomas Abraham, where I have conversations around HR technology, software as a service, and recently launched a series called The Future of Sales. Well, friends, before we get started, I thought let me also just mention that the terms gig, freelancer, contractor, have often been used interchangeably, in various research reports and by various experts. So in today's discussion, I would request the panelists to appropriately interpret it as well. So Kamal, let me get you now into the conversation. There are several components to the gig economy. Right from low-end gig workers, which include Uber drivers, electricians, plumbers, and so on, to freelancers in design, writing, and so on, to high-end gig workers in areas like consulting, project, and so on. Now, you've been in the recruiting and staffing space for over 2 years, for over 2 decades. And you actually have a ringside view of this. So how has the gig scenario evolved in India, both on the supply and the demand side, in the last few years until COVID-19 appeared on the scene? And how would you compare this with some of the Southeast Asian markets to which you have exposure? And of course, we will talk about the post-COVID scenario later in our conversation. So it'll be great to hear your thoughts, Kamal.
Sure. Thanks, Thomas, for that. And let me start by, my own experience, how gig started, way back in the Indian context. When I say gig, the representation I make is for people who have fixed term contracts, the contract staffing world where I came from. Now, I remember in 2001, L&T Infotech wanted, a secretary to replace the current one who had gone for a maternity break. So it was with the CEO of the company. And the first assignment my boss gave is, Kamal, find 3 people who can go and meet the CEO tomorrow, right? I called about 20 people, and of which about 10 of them said they don't want the job. And about 5 of them said they would go for the interview. Guess what happened? Next day, nobody turned up for the interview. After that, nobody picked up the call. Sounds familiar? One or two whom I got to speak later said, I changed my mind. I can't come on a contract job. So that was way back in 2001. 19 years later, today, this is an industry in India which is close to 72,000 crores worth. That means that many people today work, almost close to 5 million workers today are on white collar workers today work as contractors today. So that's the shift that has happened. And it's not that people are queuing up to be contract workers today, but the shift in terms of size, a global contract economy today, the market size of a contract staffing world today is about $500 billion, very close to $500 billion, for about 493 billion. And India today is close to about 10 billion, So that's how the path from $100 billion US staffing market, contract staffing market today is close. We believe by 2030, this would be close to about $20 billion market. So exactly doubling. That is the, the number shift that has happened, the context shift that has happened. Of course, we can talk about the economy of India moved, really rapidly between 2001 to 2008. There have been, underlying facilitators which have created that, but at the same time, the workforce patterns have also changed. Now, let me start also by saying that gig is not new, nor are freelancers as we call them. Just that this new nomenclature sounds hip and maybe suits the new age workers.
Right.
Remember Merchant Navy, where people worked on contract for months and were home for only a few months. And I was told that they used to earn great bucks as a kid. I used to look at it and say, this is a great job, 6 months on the seas and 6 months doing nothing, and the kids used to get the best gifts. I thought that was the coveted freelancer job, if you call it those days, right? And not to forget, the most famous freelancer in our neighborhood was that LIC uncle whom we all ran away from once we started earning, right? So if you look at freelancer, in our own world, there were different contexts. Not to forget, the BD workers and agarbatti girls, who used to roll over that, and they were also paid based on the gig they did, right? How many BDs they did, how many agarbattis they did, they got paid on that. Just like an Uber driver today gets paid on how many kilometers he drove somebody, right? So all these actually existed in our world in the past, just the nomenclature has changed, right? So if you look at where it is today, you have the largest private sector employer today in India, Quest Corp, which has 3.8 lakh gig workers. Their entire business runs on gig workers, the largest private sector employer. Can you beat that?
Yeah.
So that is just to give you a context of how the contract gig actually is shaping out to be. Look at TeamLease, the first staffing company to do a successful IPO, and they still command a healthy PE of a ratio of 35. Between both of them, they have annual turnover of 12,000 crore. They deploy close to 6 lakh gig workers every day. That is how the contract gig has sort of changed context over the last 2 decades. And of course, the movement of the food delivery that has happened, the Ubers of the world, the Swiggy, Zomatos have changed that in terms of how it has rapidly expanded over the last 5 to 6 years. And of course, the higher end of it, what we call as freelancers today, in the context of what you read, PayPal sent a report in 2018 where 1 out of every 4 freelancers in the world is an Indian. Of course, we're doing work for, mostly the American and European companies sitting in India. So the freelancer world also has sort of come into play in the last few years. But I think the world I come from is purely from the contract staffing world, where India has, today really, become so large that, it is today considered, a market to be from any labor context point of view. Of course, Thomas asked me to talk about, Southeast Asia where I work, but Thomas, honestly, I last worked there 6 years ago, so I would sort of stay away from that at this point of time, because I don't know anything which is recent. All of us can Google that out. So that's my 2 cents on how I've seen this market sort of shaping up from the world that I come from.
Right. Yeah. Thanks, Kamal, for those insights. Let me now, go over to Atul and really now, go a little deep into the technology space, and and Atul, you've had, you've been deep in the tech space, CXO roles and TechM, Sutherland, and so on and so forth. So how has this entire gig economy evolved with tech companies, the IT services companies and the various other tech companies? And are there some specific use cases or examples that you can share with us?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting story how it's evolved. So in a way, the origin that happened across of the entire outsourcing business was around some things like this. It was like contractors, as was shared right now by Kamal. And, contract work that you did across, and if you could do it offshore, that gave you some different margins. And that's the evolution of how this industry happened. But my big experience with this came across when we were doing this turnaround of Satyam. And when we started looking at the turnaround of Satyam, this was brought to my notice by one of my customers. And he said that I want you to come and visit someone along with me in California. So we walked across into this warehouse that was converted. And it happened to be this company which everyone knows today as Upwork. And we were having this little chat, and he said that, this is how work's going to be going forward. And the founders were there and so on. And I was being a little skeptical to him and said, people like the jobs, they like to work for people like us, and that's how the whole work happens. And then he said, come, I'll show you something. And he did some stuff on his screen, and then he hit some stuff, and he said, see this page of the people who earn the top 10 earners in the last 1 year. And this is from India. And I said, okay. So I'm talking about 2010 timeline, So and these are folks who were with more than $150,000. So it was $150,000 sitting across in India, being earned 10 years earlier by people who were doing some stuff on gigs. So that was the one exposure and the power of what could happen that hit me. So I of course asked him innocently, where do these people come from? Where do they do? So he says, listen, on one side, there are companies like you or G who seek the jobs. On the other side, a lot of people actually come across and register and take on these jobs. And he said, if you ask my hunch, they're working for you. So they work for you, but they also do this work. So their salary really goes up. So that was my first exposure. The companies in the IT space were a little reluctant to take them on. Our customers were more open to take them on, but on full-term contracts. It was more linked with effort and time as opposed to looking at output and outcomes kind of a thing. But that changed. And I experimented with it when I came back to TechM in 2015-16. And we said, okay, let's see what we can do into a new area like cybersecurity. And cybersecurity was still emerging. Think 5 years back, and we did this report for Government of India and all that stuff at that stage later. But cybersecurity is an emerging area. Most of us didn't have enough and adequate resources. And it was a very fast-moving place. And actually, the experts wanted to work outside companies because they got more opportunities. So just to cut the whole story short, it was we grew that business from something close to about $25 million per annum to about $110 million per annum in 10 quarters. And a large part of that happened because we could deploy gig workers. And the range of things that they worked across also showed where you could use them most effectively in tech and for a tech company per se. And that was in terms of design, in terms of being able to do investigative stuff and so on and so forth. It wasn't about maintenance and running. So that's another side of the story. But all in all, I think tech is the enabler, which has enabled this talent to become globally accessible. Talent was always available. Talent always worked in terms of fixed or in terms of gigs. But the whole angle of now having more opportunities and also the person who's taking on having more opportunity to choose from really came because of technology platforms. So that's how I would take it, Thomas.
Yeah. So yeah, thanks. Thanks. No, absolutely. I think one of the reasons why gig has also evolved is because there are a number of platforms which are now made available for actually people to use. So that's really great. So Karan, I think we've got some perspective on enterprises and and the tech space and so on. And I think you largely operate in the SME space,
Right.
and it would be interesting to know how you have seen the adoption of gig in the SME space. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Thomas. So I'll share my experience, like how we do and the generic SMEs. So as an SME, like you are always looking for growth opportunities, and there are multiple growth opportunities that you can enter into. But due to your limited constraints, it is due to limited resources, you let a lot of opportunities go. So with gig coming up, so it's an opportunity for SME to hire a gig rather than building those capability in-house, because the cost to get that talent, get that expertise internally, and then sustaining it and maintaining it is a costly affair. So for SME, it gives you flexibility, time to hire is short, as well as it is cost effective. But for SME to adopt it, they cannot like just go, or if there is a project that needs to be delivered, there's a strict timeline and you need some resources, you take it and you complete and you deliver that project. For SME to adopt it, they need to strategically define like what type of roles in an organization should be full-time and what type of roles can be part-time. So first level of, at a strategic level, these things should be defined. Otherwise it will be like a thing that if so you will not be able to use it at a strategic level. It will be just transactional, like it comes and goes. And apart from that, yeah. So apart from that, SMEs need to define their HR policies the way they have defined for employees, but keeping in the perspective, that it will be for an entrepreneur. So you cannot, why a person has opted for gig is why the person has opted for gig is because he wants flexibility, but there should be some boundaries. So you need to, at organization level, you need to define policies that will at least give him the flexibility as well as the boundary. And the most important thing is, if you want like a good number of gig workers to be part of your organization and be part of your growth journey, then you need to build an organization which is diverse and inclusive in nature, so that the hybrid workforce can work collaboratively. So that is the most important thing.
Yeah. So thanks, Karan, for that. So let's move on to the next, interesting area, which I thought we could, as a group, focus on, which is really, how has, COVID-19 impacted the gig workforce? And, we all know that the COVID-19 has had a severe impact on the economy and therefore on jobs. So, as per, IMF, there's the 3% decline in the global economy that is expected this year. And as per a McKinsey report, the Indian GDP growth is going to be, negative. They expect it could be -8 to -10%, in this fiscal year. There are also, however, coming to the gig, space specifically, there was a report that I was reading recently from the US across startups, small businesses, and corporates. And what it basically says is that, freelancer and consultation utilization has gone up, largely because people have started working remotely. There are, a lot of essential projects getting done. They're sort of augmenting project skills and transitioning the workforce largely to a remote space. I mean, over the medium term, there could be some blip in this because, obviously people are saying that, we just need to focus on what is mandatory in terms of our costs, and, perhaps some of it may get rationalized. But the overall belief is that, the long-term future is going to be extremely bullish for the entire gig and the freelance space. And I think, we're going to be seeing some tremendous growth over there. So Kamal, coming to the Indian scene now in the current scenario and post-COVID, how do you see that really panning out? And what are some of these market segments and domains where we can see a spike in India?
Sure, Thomas. I think the unfortunate part was that the gig workers were the first to get affected, as soon as COVID hit us, because it's pay as you work kind of a concept, right? Yeah, I think globally it was a great time for Upwork, which saw its stock price really doubling. Fiverr, which is a much larger company in terms of market cap, saw at least 3 times, the market cap going up for them. Since the pandemic, that's the kind of thumbs up that has gone to the business model. But unfortunately, in India, where we've had our own set of challenges, because bottom of the pyramid workers who were contract workers were the first to hit during pandemic. And of course, if you look at the 2 largest listed companies in India, Quest and Teamlease, also got hit because people felt that in the short term, the temporary work is going to get affected, and we saw a lot of gig workers getting laid off. However, on the tech sector, we saw that there was no drop, and though it didn't grow, I think it maintained its stability, as it was easy for the knowledge workers to shift to the working from home mode, right? On the government side, there's a very interesting statistic. If all of us follow NREGA well, which is nothing but National Rural Employment Guarantee Act. So we saw that in May, it was the person's days work provided under NREGA was almost 50% higher than last year's same time. And if you look at it, from, let's say, April 14 to now, this is the highest. If I had to talk about the figures in April 14, close to 150 million workers, it's calculated today in persons day work provided, which means the number of people working multiplied by number of days worked. And the government intervened during this phase, and it saw about 565 million persons days work in May 2020. So, at the rural side, I think government, sort of worked on it to create a kind of a cushion for people who are affected, especially the farm workers. And we saw, almost 50% spike over the last 1 year. Having said that, the challenge remains in terms of, some of the sectors like BFSI, where large number of gig workers are there in the front line, the people who come and sort of do your KYC and a whole lot of other work that is related to last mile. They couldn't go to field, so that work sort of went down drastically. The second largest employment sector in textile, they took a hit because everybody had to work from home, and it is not a cognitive work for textile sector. They work through the hands and legs, so that took a huge beating. So in the Indian context, in the short run, we saw almost 50% to 80% demand drop for gig work at this phase, except for the IT work where it remained. Remember, IT gig work is close to about 5 lakh workers, though value-wise, the average salaries the gig workers make in IT sector is close to about 60 to 80K, depending on, which sector and which skill you're talking about. But overall, I think the non-IT side of it, which is the largest side of gig work, got hampered. But of course, when you look at the recovery side, it's always said that, the gig working is the first to recover when the recovery happens. We saw it post 9/11, we saw it post GFC, that, the gig working is sort of took off first, and later on the permanent jobs followed suit. So if you ask me, what has come back to work right now is the essential work, the FMCG, the e-commerce delivery side of people, those kind of gig workers are back. But we know that none of us are consuming so much of restaurant and hotel food. So whatever deliveries are happening are half of it. So those kind of people who were, through Zomatos and Swiggies and Uber and Ola are still not fully on the road. So overall, the recovery as of now is less than 50% in the non-IT segment. So what we see post-COVID is that the organization context will change, because many organizations in this phase suffered from lack of flexibility. They didn't have enough gig work. So, which meant that they had to sort of find a workforce balance which allowed them to have flexibility for a scene like this tomorrow, right? So we believe that in the IT side of it, in the technology side of work, we will see companies sort of mixing or balancing their workforce to have a good mix of gig and full-time workers. And clearly, from a tomorrow's point of view, we all have to keep in mind that gig is a skill-based working. So that means that the higher the skill, the more the chances are that you can offer a gig. What we see is going forward is on the technology side, whenever we are fully open, that's a segment that we see where more gigs or freelancing will come to play. Other sectors, a lot of supply chain situations are still broken. So it's going to take a longer time for gig to become a way of life there. And let's face it, in the bottom of the pyramid, gig is not by choice. It's by your context. So that will take a little more time to become a way of life or to recover as well. So that's my 2 cents on it.
Yeah, so thanks, Kamal. So I just wanted, Atul, to react to this information that I've read recently at the Economic Times. So the article really said that, there was a spike in gig work in June, mostly for designers and content writers. So I think what Kamal spoke was largely, maybe, people down the pyramid in terms of gigs. But, there is also a context about, more of the white collar, focused gig as well. And also in that, and this is really related more to that. And it says that, companies are increasingly now opting to work with freelancers, as these arrangements, reduces costs and makes it a preferable choice in these times. The ET article also stated that one of the gig platforms saw a 75% spike in the number of freelance positions published in April. And there is an estimate that 25 to 30% of the workforce in a large number of sectors like internet businesses, IT, ITES, startups, hospitality, QSRs, logistics, and so on would get converted to freelance and gig. So that's a huge shift that is happening, and it's really dramatic, and the impact for organizations perhaps could be significant. That suddenly because of all that is happening over the next maybe 6 months, 1 year, or 1.5 years, the mix of employees in an organization is going to change quite dramatically. And I personally, I'm not too sure if organizations are sort of have really thought about this, and leave alone are sort of getting prepared for this. So what's your observation, Atul, and sort of thoughts around this?
So you've got to look at it from two different perspectives. I think one from the perspective of the employer and the other one from the employee perspective. So let's look at the employer perspective. On the employer perspective, all businesses, as much as possible, want to make all their revenue earning things variable costs as opposed to fixed costs. Whereas traditional definitions of work have always kind of insisted that you have a particular kind of a structure, which is rooted in the 20th century, really. To say that this is how an organization will build a culture, it will build apprenticeships, it will build talent, and so on and so forth, and that's what's good for business. A lot of that is up for change in today's day and age, and these typically happen when you have things that hit you. So imagine a situation in 2001 when we had the dot-com crash, and we had something like COVID. I guess a lot of things would be behind the curve, everything would be rationed, and so on and so forth. Shift fast to 2008, if the same thing happened across a lot of the fintech stuff that we take for granted today in terms of payments, etc. and all, would have been under tremendous stress, except for some countries, which we would have called the developed countries, which would have something continuing, but the rest of the world won't. Shift to 2020, when we've had COVID, a lot of those things, because they are technology enabled and there are lots of other things around it that have been put across, the possibility of continuity has increased very drastically. So organizations have reckoned and realized that that is possible to do this, but they were not willing to try out new models. But this time, COVID has forced them to even check out things and realize that they can actually do things better. Take the IT sector as a context. In the IT sector, we built these great islands of excellence because we had better infrastructure there. We could have better connectivity there, and we could create an environment where regulation and monitoring could happen better. Switch to 2020, chances are that your infrastructure at home is as good, your connectivity at home is as good, and in a way, you can deliver the same service because you're delivering it to the US in any case. You could deliver it from here. So I think that realization has come in. So the organizations are starting to relook at this entire aspect coming in. That's one part. There's a second part that organizations, especially in the tech sector, are looking at it differently, saying that in the past, it was that if you wanted to staff something, you'd, let's say, have 100 people on it, and they'd work for, let's say, 1 year on the whole project. But today, you've gone into that micro bitting where you can say that I actually need so many hours of design, so many hours of testing, so many hours of coding, and so on and so forth. Now, I might as well have the best of people for these things or that thing, and so on and so forth. And that's starting to come. And I want to give an example on this. I work with one of these startups, and I've been talking to them about these concepts in the last couple of weeks. And so the other day, I get a call from the founder, and he says that, this new thing that we're developing, can you help me identify someone in Ukraine who can build it for me? The reason was because in that particular technology, I had kind of shared with him that, Ukraine's got the best resources. So why won't you, Ukraine or Estonia and that area? So why won't you look at them? So here's a person who's a startup in India, typically known for lower cost people, good quality talent, willing to look at this whole thing happening. And that was not the end of it. Then he gave me a class on it because he's taken on this thing more seriously than me. And said, if I wanted to do UI stuff out of India, I would actually give it to Bangladesh. Don't ask me why, but he figured out and he got the reason. And he said, if I had accounting related stuff, I would have given it to Pakistan. So what I'm saying is that acceptance is happening. So that's one part of the story. I think the second part of the story is equally important. I think careers were thought of as, they've evolved. I mean, my dad's time, I guess it was one company for life and that was a career. In my life, it's been multiple companies when I started, people used to wonder why I'm moving so many companies. Today, it's par for the course. In the future, it is, I reckon it's going to be a series of gigs, which will define a thing. And we have examples to look at because the film industry or the entertainment industry is a classic example of that. So a director comes together along with a team. Everyone is on a gig. So they come and make that film and they dispense. Sometimes they like to work with each other for the next gig. They again come together kind of a scenario. So there are precedents, and in tech, I've always said that, whatever happens in Hollywood gets followed by Silicon Valley. So that's what's going to happen across. So they dream, we do. So I guess that's really where it is. So coming to the specific question, and after COVID, what's going to happen? I think that the general acceptance of a gig worker is going to increase. The ability to induct them into your programs and projects will increase. Structures will be discussed because it is no longer just an HR, but a line manager issue kind of a thing, because they have to manage them and so on and so forth. So I think it's going to push the envelope. And just like every one of these kind of hits has taken 4 years, 5 years before it becomes mainstream. So this will take 4-5 years to become mainstream. But the train has left the station. So the gig workers are here to stay.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And in fact, I was sort of reading a report some time back, which said that, employees who are the most satisfied actually are those who do more than one job at a time. So they have a full-time job and they have a gig. And, I guess it will be time before, organization leaders start recognizing that perhaps, many of their full-time employees are also doing a gig somewhere else, because, maybe they built that expertise and bring it to their own organizations, which can add, tremendous amount of value. So sort of moving on now to really, how technology is being used by organizations to manage this. So I just wanted to refer to Josh Berson's 2020 HR Tech report, where he says that only 16% of companies have a strategy for managing gig work. That's really revealing, and this also has a lot of large enterprises and so on. And he says that in a general, there's a general lack of awareness and lack of interest in managing gig workers strategically. And of course, this will all change because, COVID-19 is going to change the scenario in a very significant way. And one of the biggest issues is data. So HR departments simply do not know how many contractors, part-timers, gig workers, et cetera, are employed by their companies. And they don't know what these workers are doing, and they have no process to establish standards or manage this workforce strategically. So this clearly opens up several opportunities for technology solutions that could be deployed by enterprises. And, I think there are global HCM platforms which are doing something on this front. But Karan, you run a very successful HCM platform in India. And what are some capabilities that you feel you should be building into your HCM to deal with the scenario where 25-30% today could be gig in an organization? It could be more over a period of time. Based on, how fast or how quickly people have jumped onto the train, right? So what do you see as some kind of a roadmap as well for, HCM platforms?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Thomas. So to get the best out of this talent, you really need to do some internal engineering in the organization. You need to set the boundaries and some norms, how they will operate with your permanent workforce. And to do this, right type of tools are required to establish this type of, to make hybrid workforce perform for our same goal. So a tool should have 3 things that will make it a successful gig. So first is alignment and collaboration. So if your complete workforce, so rightly, Thomas, what you said is HR are not aware because a gig and employee are not on same platform. So firstly, the platform should be flexible enough to manage the gig workforce as well as your permanent workforce, so that HR can monitor it and knows how many gig workers are working on what type of projects. Second is the gig life cycle management. So we have HCM tool that manages employee life cycle, complete employee life cycle from their recruitment to when they retire. So similarly, there should be tool should have the capability to managing the complete life cycle, but it should be crisp, because it cannot, like, the onboarding and putting the gig worker on the project should be like super fast, because they are for the short time. If the process is like a permanent employee, then it will be a big failure. And thirdly, the project life cycle management should be part of this HCM tool. Reason being, because your complete employees are there. So how to track, how to collaborate, because there will be a common project where permanent as well as gig force will be working. So project lifecycle management, their timesheet tracking, their task monitoring, their performance on that particular project, as well as their profile, gig profile, that how their past projects have been, the experience of an organization with that worker should be there. So we have a like an innovative roadmap for HROne to accomplish things that I have just mentioned. So a lot of things are available and we are working on it so that we are fully ready with the gig platform, because it's the future. Yeah.
Yeah, no, actually, I've been approached by several large consulting firms who have actually said that, this is a big issue with a lot of organizations who've got full-time and who've got a whole huge contract workforce. And, there is a big challenge for organizations to actually have a platform, which can use that. And also, and I think many of these things may happen a little more seamlessly in maybe some of the larger enterprises, but bulk of India, are mid-sized companies, smaller companies,
Right.
and so on, and they will all really struggle. Yeah. So actually, now moving on to to another very interesting area, which is a significant, to my mind, a significant paradigm shift that could potentially happen. The fact is that unemployment rates are going up, across the world. And the thought process which a lot of people have is that as unemployment rises, self-employment will also start rising. And what this means is that, we will have more people becoming entrepreneurs, and we will also have more people who will be gig workers, because, many people would lose jobs. Many people would have reduced income. So they would need to have a gig to actually supplement that income as well. So are we now going to be seeing, employees in general in India becoming more comfortable with being gig workers as opposed to full-time employees? And will this be a paradigm shift for professionals and skilled workers? And okay, it may, you may have some high-end people who might easily adapt to this, but if you look at corporate India as a whole, do you think that we are on the cusp of a major paradigm shift? Kamal, your thoughts?
Yes and no, for the reason that there are still some frictions, Thomas, which corporate India needs to sort of take care of, and it applies both ways in a way. The four frictions that I generally talk about is the challenge which relates to the skill friction. The skill the enterprises want and the skill the gig workers bring to table, do they match? One. Two, though I think this is at this point of time negated with work from home, but the location. In the past, I think it always came in the way of where the job is versus where, versus where the skill worker is, right? The third is salary. What will you pay me, or rather the money that you pay? What will you pay me, and what is the enterprise willing to pay, right? And most importantly is the timing part. When I want the job as a gig worker, will the enterprise have one? Or when the enterprise one, the skill match, salary matched, gig worker be available? So these four frictions of skills, location, salary, timing, I think had to sort of get played out in the right balance. And that's when I think it will truly take off the way, I look at it, honestly. Also at the same time, I think it's important not to over romanticize gig working, for the reason that, if you ask, and if you look at some of the surveys that has come out of freelancers, most of the freelancers, if you ask them, the biggest challenge is getting money on time. 60% of them complain that the enterprises don't pay them on time. Whereas you ask the contract workers, it's the other way around. So most of them actually, because they are bound to the enterprises, they get their salaries on time. So there are challenges related to how the gig economy is going to pursue. We can't just look at the low-end workers for average salaries as 20-25K, which is what India mostly has over-romanticized on gig working with the Uber, Ola, and the Swiggy workers. And if you talk about the high-end workers, or the high-skilled workers, whom we can call them as freelancers readily, there the challenge is that people want benefits, and 50% of them do not get the benefits that a full-time employee gets. So it's a paradox that if you ask a full-time employee, would they like to be freelancer? 80% of them would they say yes, provided they get the same salary and they get the freedom of the freelancer. That doesn't exist, right? if you ask a freelancer, you want a full-time job, especially under COVID, people said, I rather have a full-time job because, the first thing that the organization cut was the discretionary spend, and whosoever freelancers, that those were the guys who got cut in India. So I think it's important to carefully navigate and not to say that, gig economy is here and all of us want to be gig workers. My view is we're a little over romanticizing it. It's like, when I saw Dil Chahta, Zindagi Na Milegi Dobara, I felt, oh, I want to go to Goa. I saw Zindagi Na Milegi Dobara, I said, I want to do skydiving. But that's not day-to-day life, right?
Right.
So I think the day-to-day reality is that I want an income guarantee. And that's what full-time employment provides. But the organizations need to balance, because if there are too many people in full-time, they couldn't balance it during COVID, and they had, most of them said, I have 100% cost and only 80% revenue. So these frictions of supply-demand gap has to sort of play out in the favor of freelancers. That can only happen at a high skill level. At the skill levels that India operates today, I think, we still have a lot of distance to cover.
Yeah, so I just want to talk a little bit about the high skill level, and maybe Atul, just for your benefit, just an anecdotal piece of information. So I've been approached by a lot of sales professionals over the last few years, and more so in the last 3 months. They reach out to me on LinkedIn, send their CVs, and they say, "Hey, looking for jobs, can you help?" and so on and so forth. But my standard line to them in the beginning is, hey, you guys are really good. You're fairly seasoned sales professionals, and you probably have a great Rolodex as well. So why would you want a full-time job? Why don't you, take a gig? Why don't you work for multiple organizations and sell? The earnings may be low right now, but, over the next few years, you could probably earn significantly. And I must tell you that every single time the answer is no. So the sales guys who are actually supposed to be higher risk takers, are all looking for full-time jobs. So Atul, I mean, is it sort of, is it peculiar to some particular kind of domains, or is it something that you would say is there across the board? Yeah.
No, I think you've got a point on that entire thing. So let's look at the sales example that you gave. So a salesperson takes more risk by saying I can do more effort and can get a return, but he doesn't take the risk in terms of saying that I'll find the job and then I'll do something like that. So I think the challenge that comes across is that if you're a gig worker or you're a gigger, is it that you want to do this as a permanent thing, or do you want to do it part-time? A large number of people want to do it part-time only. That's how they start. It's only if they get confidence that they want to move across as far as the rest of it is concerned. Now that applies to places which have got an established mechanism where you have an alternate angle of employment. But things like, let's say, like I gave the example of films, you don't have an alternate mechanism that's inspiring there. So there you start off as a gig worker to begin with itself. So industries make a difference also from that point of view. Having said that, there are certain characteristics, like was pointed out correctly, that there is risk that comes across. There's also an angle that I have to deliver consistently at a particular kind of a level, and I must have mechanisms by which I can get that money in quickly based on whatever is the contractual obligation. And these are lacunae areas where there is fair amount of disputes that happen and becomes a case of wastage. Wherever you don't have that, their gig working has taken off in a big way. If you're looking at tech sector, I think where it is taken off, strangely, it's not so much on the sales side. It's been more in the angle of building propositions and solutions. So in there, for instance, if you're doing a $100 million kind of a deal, you'd want to know something about the process. You want a process in terms of what you're working on there. Or you want to know some detailing in terms of regulation, etc. in that industry. This may not be relevant for you for in the longer term, but it's relevant for you when you put that proposition together. So in solutioning, there's a fair amount of gig work that's come across all IT companies, for instance, all BPO companies. It's become almost standard that you get those kind of people. But when it comes down to running and operations, where the SOPs and everything else is defined, you're not looking for those kind of people. So you're looking for people who are just going to follow the same thing, who are very happy and satisfied doing what they're doing, improve themselves and keep rising into the talent pool or the hierarchy of a company. Different kind of individuals. But increasingly, I think that the younger folks are more open about the fact that your career will be a combination of gigs. And they could be gigs not in one area, there could be gigs across multiple areas. And so you're going to see this proliferate, and it's going to increase more and more as a lot of the other stuff gets automated and the repetitive stuff is not needed across. So people will take those chances, but it'll take time. It won't happen fast.
Sure. So Karan, this entire work from home experience has also, in a way, shaped, the thought process of employees. Because employees have had time to skill themselves, do new things, look at the world, take a different worldview, and so on. So, do you think this work from home experiment and experience that we are going through will also shape this paradigm that we're talking about, which is full-time versus gig?
Yeah, Thomas. So, I think it's more favorable in millennials because rather than a middle-aged employee. Reason being because he's independent, he is risk taker, he can take. So, gig equal to entrepreneur. So, it's a daring ride. So, not everyone want to. They want to experiment. They want to get that feeling, but doing full-time gig and leaving a permanent job is a risk-taking venture that definitely they would like to do a full-time with some part-time, or they want to experiment because they have time, they are upskilling themselves, they are getting time to learn about, or maybe whatever their hobbies are they're trying to earn out of that. So in millennial, definitely there is they will go for, or they start with, but middle age has a family responsibility. If we talk about in India at least. So there I see there will be, and there will growth will be towards that millennial. Yeah. And also the platforms like Uber, Ola, definitely there will be growth in gig, but not a very a drastic growth.
Can I just make a little addition there, because it's something recently that I came across. There's a whole bunch of people who used to stay at home but were very qualified, and for want of anything, and I don't mean it for the gender bias, but there were a lot of women who walked out of the workforce at different stages, but either are able to devote time for doing gigs, or are empty nesters who are more charged up than maybe the bread earner of the past to do things across. So I'm seeing a new energy coming across from this whole group, because they are enabled suddenly because of technology, and they add huge value. It's not that their talent is less or anything. It's a question of whether you're able to harness that talent or get access to that talent. And I think technology platforms have enabled us to get access to them. So it's actually opening up the workforce. It's going to be a new normal that will come in, which will also impact what kind of salaries people get across.
Okay, so I've got a couple of rapid fire questions, Atul, the first is for you. If you were to do a startup tomorrow, would you have a team which is 100% gig?
No, it will not be 100% gig, but let me put it that I would think that about 80% of it would be gig, 20% would be people who are core, and you need this core for continuity. That's the reason you'll have it.
Yeah. Okay, one for you, Kamal. So Kamal, do you feel that you need to have an entrepreneurial mindset to be a gig worker? And now we are talking about maybe the skilled, side of things.
Yeah, you definitely. I think more than entrepreneurial, if skill is given, what is required is your ability to stay disciplined. I think most of the times in gig working, besides being entrepreneur, which gets you the work, what gets you future work is your ability to stay disciplined and relationship. It's like an employment in a way. It's just that whosoever is giving you gig, you need to earn their respect. They're going to be your customer now, no longer your employer. So in my view, how you actually get a higher rating. We all going to be rated as gig employees tomorrow, right? We obviously want to be a 4.9 on 5 to get our next gig. So in my view, your discipline and relationship with your customer will be the two most important factors.
Yeah, thanks. And I must give you a small anecdote again. One of the companies that I'm just started advising recently, they have about 15, 20 employees right now. Founder in the US, and they have employees in different parts, largely in India. It is 100% gig, including the founder. So he's also doing it as a gig. But interestingly, they've made a lot of progress. They already have established a global GTM partnership and things of that kind. And I think soon, they will start migrating into a blended model. But I think the founder is very clear that there are lots of high-end, tech resources which they will not be able to afford which will sort of, continue to be gig. So I think, we've got lots of questions, but I think we have answered, to my mind, most of these questions in the course of our conversation. And I think we've, almost hit, the 1 hour mark. So thank you so much, Kamal, Atul, Karan, for that wonderful and, engaging conversation.